I'm still trying to make sense of everything that's happened even now. Even though it happened 3 years ago, I'm still coming to terms with it. At the time, I was 61 years old and I was living in Manchester, where I'd spent most of my adult life just working at the same insurance firm and doing whatever it is that I was doing. I'd been divorced for quite a long time at that point. Wasn't looking for anyone, and I wasn't looking for anything in particular. I was just focused on making it to retirement in one piece and maybe having enough left over to actually enjoy it. I had £147,000 saved up, which, when converted, was roughly $185,000. It was everything I'd built over 40 years of working, plus what I got from selling my half of the house after the divorce. It was my plan to retire early, move somewhere warm, and stretch that money as far as it could go. But after I was there for only 8 months, I was completely broke, completely betrayed, and sleeping on a mate's couch back in England, wondering how I'd let it all slip away. I was 61 when I finally decided I'd had enough of Manchester winters and corporate redundancy threats. I'd spent 38 years at the same insurance company just processing claims, attending meetings that could have been emails, and watching younger people get promoted past me. I felt like I was pretty boring, really. I was completely invisible at work, and I'd been invisible at home for years before the divorce. I had $185,000 saved up, although it wasn't a fortune, but I felt excited about the future for the first time in decades. I'd sold my house after the divorce was finalized in 2019, walked away with half, and I'd been contributing to my pension since I was 23. I had about £3,200 a month coming in from my pension once I took early retirement, which converted to roughly $4,000 a month. More than enough to live comfortably in Southeast Asia. I got married back in 1987. We went on to have 2 kids. The marriage was fine for the first decade, I suppose, but then it just became routine, and then it became cold, and then it became arguments about money and whose turn it was to pick up milk. She filed for divorce in 2017, wanted the house, wanted half my pension, wanted everything except me, apparently. It was nasty in the way divorces between people who've run out of things to say to each other usually are. By the time 2020 came around, I was 58 and living in a rented flat that smelled like damp and old carpet, wondering if this was really all there was left. I'd heard people talk about the Philippines, how the cost of living was lower, how life could be easier, and how a man could start fresh. A couple of lads at work had been going to Thailand for years, and one of them had retired early to Pattaya. He'd send photos back of beaches and cheap beer, and women who smiled at him. I let myself believe it because I wanted something like that to be true so badly. I wanted to be someone who mattered somewhere, even if it was just because I had a Western passport and a pension. By the time I turned 60 inches 2021, I started thinking, why was I even staying here? I could retire early with a slightly reduced pension. I had enough saved that the reduction wouldn't matter. I had nothing waiting for me in Manchester except gray skies and grandchildren who barely knew my name. I could live there on the money I had. I could have a nice place, a nice girlfriend, and I could be respected for once instead of just being another aging bloke shuffling through Tesco on a Saturday morning. I joined a dating site focused on the Philippines. I can't remember what it was called now, Filipino Cupid or something like that. But it was clear that there were more girls on there than guys, and it was quite interesting to receive messages from girls in their early 20s and late 20s saying they wanted a serious relationship with someone just like me. I got it that they came from a poor background and needed financial support. I get they wanted a better life, but I wanted a better life as well. And by being with someone like that, I thought I would have a better life, not just financially, but emotionally, I suppose. Someone who would actually be happy to see me at the end of the day. Before long, I started talking to one girl who was from Puerto Princesa in Palawan. She was only 28 years old, but it was as if she completely looked past my age and appearance and looked at who I was inside as a person. Her name was Carmela. She had these photos on her profile where she was at the beach, with her family, smiling in this way that felt genuine. Not the pouty selfies you'd see on other profiles, just her looking happy and natural. We started chatting every single day. She'd tell me about her job at a call center, how exhausting the night shifts were, how she was trying to save money to help her family build a proper bathroom in their house. She asked me about Manchester, about what my life was like, about my kids, and my job. And she actually listened. She'd remember things I'd said days earlier and bring them up again. When I told her I was thinking about retiring early and moving somewhere warm, she said Palawan was the most beautiful place on earth and that I'd love it there. It only took me about 6 weeks of daily video calls and hundreds of messages to decide to go and see her. I booked a flight for December 2021, 3 weeks in Palawan over Christmas. I figured if it went badly, at least I'd had a holiday. If it went well, maybe I'd found what I was looking for. When I called my daughter and told her that I met someone and she's actually younger than you, I could hear her sigh as if to say, "Here we go." She didn't say anything nasty, just asked if I was sure I knew what I was doing, if I'd been careful with my money, if I'd told her where I was staying. I told her I was 60 years old and didn't need a lecture, but I could hear the concern in her voice, and I chose to ignore it because I didn't want her ruining this for me. When we met, I was 61 and Carmela was 28. I'll admit there was an age gap, a significant one, but she said she didn't care. She said that age was just a number and what mattered was how someone treated you. In a way, I felt like she was the more experienced of the two of us. She'd been married before to a Filipino guy, had a daughter who was 6 years old, and she'd been through things I couldn't imagine. Growing up without running water, working night shifts to send money home, raising a child mostly on her own after her ex-husband left. Part of me knew what the game was in the Philippines. I'd read the forums, seen the warnings, heard the stories about guys getting cleaned out by bar girls and scammers, and part of me had already come to the conclusion that Carmela might want something from me eventually. But I chose to ignore it because when she hugged me at the airport in Puerto Princesa, when she introduced me to her daughter, when she took me to the beach and we walked along the sand at sunset, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt wanted. For the first 3 weeks, everything was perfect. We met for breakfast every morning at a little place near her apartment. She'd take time off work when she could, and we'd ride her motorbike out to the beaches. Nakpan, Nagtaban, places where the sand was white and the water was so clear you could see fish swimming around your feet. I found myself opening up to her more than I expected. I told her about the divorce, about how invisible I'd felt for years, about how I was afraid of growing old alone. After that first visit in December 2021, I went back to Manchester for 2 months, but we video called every single day, sometimes twice a day. She'd be getting ready for work at 9 p.m. her time, and I'd be having breakfast. We'd just talk about nothing really, but it felt like everything. By February 2022, I couldn't stand being in England anymore. I took my early retirement package, sold what little furniture I had, and booked a one-way ticket back to Puerto Princesa. After dating for 3 months, that's when we decided to take things further. Carmela was living in a small apartment with her daughter and her younger sister, traveling over an hour each way to work on a motorbike taxi because she couldn't afford her own transportation. I rented us a proper 2-bedroom condo in the city center for 18,000 pesos a month, which was about $350. It had air conditioning, a real bathroom, and a balcony where we could sit in the evenings. It made sense. Why should she be struggling when I had the money to make life easier for both of us? She was working at a call center and making around 20,000 pesos a month, which was about $400. Her schedule was brutal, 9 p.m. to 6 a.m. 4 nights a week, and she was exhausted all the time. I agreed to send 12,000 pesos a month, about $250, to help support her daughter who was staying with Carmela's mother in the province while we got settled. I felt like this was a fair amount, and honestly it was nothing to me. Back in England, £200 would barely cover a week's groceries. Here, it was changing a child's life. I was happy to make those changes because a part of me always was looking for a connection and to have someone to go home to in the evenings. We'd cook dinner together, simple things like adobo and rice, and we'd watch Netflix shows she'd downloaded. She'd teach me Tagalog words, laughing when I completely butchered the pronunciation. She was affectionate, always holding my hand when we walked around the city, kissing me goodbye before she left for work. She made me feel like I mattered. After we had been together for 5 months and lived together for 2, I had to pull the trigger and ask her to marry me. I wanted to take things further with her, and I felt like she would want the same, which she did. I proposed on the beach at sunset, like something out of a film, and she cried and said yes and called her mother immediately to tell her. And we decided to get married in June 2022, both excited about it. Her family wanted a big ceremony in the province, but we kept it small, just us, her daughter, her parents, a few cousins. It cost me about $1,500, all in, which seemed reasonable for a wedding. After things went smoothly for 4 months of marriage, it only seemed logical to look for a house. I wasn't about to rush into things, though. And first things first, let's find a place where we could actually build something permanent. Carmela had been talking about Palawan as our forever home since before I'd even arrived, and I liked the idea of having property, something real that we'd built together. We started looking at land for sale around Puerto Princesa, but Carmela kept mentioning her hometown on the west coast of Palawan, a small place called Roxas. It was about 3 hours from the city, closer to the beach, and her entire family lived there. She said land was cheaper there. We could build a house for less, and her mother could help look after the place when we traveled. It made sense at the time. We went to look at some land available for sale about 2 kilometers from the beach in Roxas. It was a 500 square meter plot, mostly flat, with coconut trees and some overgrown grass. The road wasn't paved yet, just gravel and dirt, but the area was developing. The owner was an older Filipino man who needed money quickly for a medical emergency, or at least that's what we were told. We bought that land for $12,000. It wasn't much money in the grand scheme of things, and land in England would have cost 20 times that for half the size. Carmela handled all the negotiations because my Tagalog was still terrible, and she knew how to talk to locals in a way that got things done. We got the deed of sale drawn up, paid in cash, and suddenly we owned land in the Philippines. Or rather, Carmela owned land in the Philippines. As a foreigner, I wasn't allowed to own land in the Philippines. Most definitely not land and therefore not a house. That was something that really annoyed me because I felt like if I could have done everything properly in my own name, things may have turned out better. But the law was the law, and every expat I'd spoken to said the same thing. You put it in your wife's name, you trust her, and you hope for the best. Carmela assured me it didn't matter. What's mine is yours, she'd say. We're married, it's the same thing. And honestly, I wanted to believe her. We were married. We'd stood in front of her family and made vows. She wore my ring. She called me her husband. Why wouldn't I trust her? Our budget was $35,000 to build the house, and for that we planned to get a decent 3-bedroom place with a proper kitchen, 2 bathrooms, and a covered terrace. Carmela's uncle was a contractor and said he could do it for less than if we hired someone from the city. He drew up plans, gave us a quote, and we agreed to pay in stages as the work progressed. The foundation went in by October 2022. Watching it take shape was incredible, if I'm being honest. This was something I'd never had in England. A house built exactly how we wanted it, with high ceilings and big windows to catch the breeze. Carmela was there almost every day overseeing things while I stayed in the city working on getting my resident visa sorted. She'd send me photos of the progress, and I felt proud. This was ours. This was the future. By December, the walls were up and the roof was on. We'd spent about $28,000 so far, and Carmela said we needed another $12,000 to finish everything. The electrical work, plumbing, flooring, and paint. I'd gone over budget. But what's another $5,000 when you're already this deep? I sold another chunk of my investments back in England and sent the money. We'd have the house finished by February 2023, and we could finally move in properly. 6 months after we finished the house, Carmela started talking about buying a vehicle. She said riding motorbike taxis everywhere was dangerous and expensive, especially now that we were living between Roxas and Puerto Princesa. She wanted something reliable, something that could handle the roads in the province, and she'd found a used Toyota Fortuner for sale. I looked at it and honestly it seemed like a decent buy. It was a 2015 model, well maintained, only 85,000 kilometers on it. The owner was asking $18,000, which seemed steep, but Carmela negotiated him down to $15,500. She said having our own car would change everything. We could visit her family more often, take trips around Palawan, and she could even use it to start a small business renting it out to tourists. The thing was, I was starting to feel the strain on my finances. I'd spent $12,000 on land, $40,000 on building the house when I'd planned for $35,000, and now another $15,500 on a car. That was $67,500 in less than a year. I'd started in the Philippines with $185,000, and I was already down to $117,500. My pension was $4,000 a month, which was plenty to live on, but I was eating into my savings faster than I'd planned. I sold another portion of my investments and sent the money. We bought the Fortuner in August 2023. Carmela was over the moon. She posed for photos with it, took her daughter for drives, and even drove me around proudly showing it off to her family. It felt good seeing her happy, and I told myself it was a one-time purchase. We had the house, we had the car, and now we could just settle down and enjoy life. But then, 2 months later, Carmela's mother got sick, or at least that's what I was told. She needed surgery for something. I never got the full details, but it was going to cost 150,000 pesos, about $3,000. Carmela was in tears when she told me. Her mother had raised her, sacrificed everything for her, and now she needed help and Carmela didn't have the money. I swallowed my pride and sent it. I told myself this was what family did, and Carmela's family was my family now. But then 3 months after that, her brother needed money for his college tuition. Another $1,800. Then her cousin needed money to repair his fishing boat. Another $900. Then there was a family gathering and they needed money for the food. Another $600. It wasn't that I couldn't afford it. It was just that I thought we were in a genuine relationship and that she loved me, and if she did, she wouldn't keep asking for it. Before we were married, Carmela never asked for anything from me. She was happy and content just being able to spend time together, eat street food from vendors, watch movies on her phone. But when we were married, I could feel like she was more comfortable, but not comfortable in a positive way, comfortable in a negative way, comfortable asking, comfortable expecting. Every time she brought up a new request, I told myself I was going to say no, but she just kept pushing and pushing. She'd cry and say her family would be disappointed in her, that they'd think she'd married a stingy foreigner who didn't care about them. She'd say things like, "In Filipino culture, we take care of family," and I'd feel guilty, like I was being selfish for wanting to protect what little I had left. Lo and behold, 2 months later, and the family wanted more money. Always about the family. By the end of 2023, I'd sent an additional $8,500 in various family requests. On top of the $250 a month, I was already sending for her daughter. I was hemorrhaging money, and I didn't know how to stop it without causing a massive fight or making Carmela miserable to be around. We lived in Puerto Princesa most of the time because it was more convenient. Carmela had quit her call center job after we got married because the hours were brutal and I'd told her she didn't need to work anymore. I could support us both. We had our little condo, and our routine was simple. I'd wake up early, make coffee, and she'd sleep in until noon because old habits die hard from years of night shifts. Manila was busy, modern, and honestly a bit overwhelming when we'd visit for visa appointments or shopping. But when we went to Roxas to check on the house and visit her family, I felt differently about things. Palawan's west coast was quiet, undeveloped, beautiful in a raw way that reminded me why I'd come to the Philippines in the first place. We'd spend weekends there, and I'd sit on our unfinished terrace drinking San Miguel while Carmela cooked with her mother and aunts in the outdoor kitchen. One thing I noticed very quickly being in the Philippines was how cheap everything was compared to England. A meal at a local carinderia was 100 pesos, about $2. A massage was $5. A haircut was $2. I could live comfortably on $1,500 a month if I was careful, which should have left me plenty of cushion. But somehow, we were always spending more. I learned some Tagalog, enough to order food and make small talk with the neighbors, but not enough to follow conversations when Carmela's family switched to rapid-fire Tagalog at gatherings. I made a few expat friends, mostly older British and American guys who hung around the same bars and restaurants. We'd share stories, compare notes on life in the Philippines, and I'd always feel relieved when they'd complain about the same things I was experiencing: the constant money requests, the cultural misunderstandings, the feeling of being an outsider even in your own home. I thought I was adjusting well. I thought Carmela and I were building something real, but underneath, I already knew I was caught in something I just couldn't pull myself out of. The money was draining faster than I'd planned. Carmela was changing in ways I didn't want to admit, and I was starting to feel isolated even when I was surrounded by her entire family at gatherings where I couldn't understand half of what was being said. By early 2024, I'd already spent $91,500 in total. I had roughly $93,500 remaining in my savings account. My original plan was to touch my savings as little as possible and live primarily on my $4,000 monthly pension, maybe dipping into savings for big one-time purchases like the house or car. But reality was nowhere close to that. I told myself $2,000 a month would be enough to cover everything: rent, food, utilities, Carmela's daughter's support, and some entertainment. But within 6 months of getting married, it was closer to $3,500 per month. And no matter how many times I looked at the figures, I couldn't explain where it was all going. It was Carmela's personal spending, nails done every 2 weeks at 1,500 pesos, hair treatments every month at 3,000 pesos, new clothes constantly because she said she needed to look nice, family requests coming in like clockwork. Her mother needed money for medication, her brother needed money for school supplies, her sister needed money for her kid's birthday party. Lifestyle creep. We weren't eating at local carinderias anymore. We were going to nicer restaurants in the city, spending 2,000 pesos per meal instead of 200. Property maintenance on the Roxas house that never seemed to end. The septic tank needed repairs. The gate needed painting. The garden needed landscaping. And nights where I gave in to requests I didn't want to approve, just to avoid the sulking and silent treatment that would follow if I said no. One evening in March 2024, I sat her down and told her it couldn't go on like this, that our budget was $2,500 a month maximum and there was no more flexibility. I tried to make it sound firm but fair, and I told her that if we wanted to have any kind of future together, we had to stick to it. I showed her the bank statements, pointed out that we'd burned through nearly half my savings in less than 2 years, and explained that my pension wasn't infinite. She nodded and didn't argue, but I could tell she wasn't happy. Her face had this look like I'd just told her I was canceling Christmas. She said she understood. She'd be more careful. She'd talk to her family about not asking so much. But I could feel the shift in the air between us. Every request after that turned into an argument, every peso questioned, and I found myself second-guessing whether I was the one being unreasonable. Carmela would say things like, "You have so much money and you can't help my mother?" Or, "Other foreigners take care of their wife's family. Why are you different?" She'd cry and say I didn't understand Filipino culture, that I was selfish, that she'd made a mistake marrying someone who didn't care about what mattered to her. The guilt was crushing. Here I was, a man with more money than most Filipinos would see in a lifetime, arguing over a few $100s while her family lived in houses with tin roofs and no hot water. But at the same time, I could see my savings evaporating, and I was terrified of ending up with nothing. Things did change after we'd been married for about a year, and not in ways I was expecting. Before we got married, Carmela never asked for anything from me. She was grateful for small gestures, a nice dinner, a little gift, paying for gas when we'd take the motorbike somewhere. But after the wedding, I could feel like she was more comfortable asking, and the requests became more frequent and more expensive. Carmela started going back to Roxas by herself more often. At first, it made sense. She said she needed to check on the house, make sure the construction workers were doing things properly, spend time with her mother and daughter. I'd stay in Puerto Princesa because honestly, 3 hours on rough roads in the Fortuner wasn't my idea of fun, and I had visa appointments and other admin to handle in the city. But something changed when she went there alone. We had an agreement together that if one of us called the other, we had to pick up straight away. That was her rule, actually. She'd always been a bit paranoid about me talking to other women, would check my phone, occasionally, ask who I was messaging. But when she went to Roxas by herself, suddenly she was very difficult to contact. I'd call her in the evening, around 7 or 8 p.m., which was when she'd usually be free. The phone would ring, and she wouldn't answer. I'd try again an hour later, nothing. I'd send messages on Facebook Messenger, and they'd sit there unread for hours, sometimes not until the next morning. When she'd finally call me back, there was always an excuse, going out with her family somewhere and left the phone behind. Accidentally left the phone in the house when she went to the market. No battery on the phone because of rolling brownouts and power cuts. No signal in her mother's area because the cell tower was down. At first, I let it go. The Philippines wasn't England. Power cuts were common. Signal was spotty in rural areas. Maybe I was being paranoid. But then it kept happening. Every single time she went to Roxas without me, she'd become unreachable for hours at a time. I tried to ask her about it gently, like, "Is everything okay? I worry when I can't reach you." She'd brush it off, say I was being too controlling, that she needed space and couldn't be expected to answer the phone every second of the day. She'd turn it around on me, saying, "Why don't you trust me? Do you think I'm doing something wrong?" And honestly, I didn't know. Part of me thought maybe she was just with her family and genuinely forgot about her phone. But part of me, the part I was trying to ignore, wondered if there was someone else, a local guy, an ex, someone who'd be there when I wasn't. The paranoia started eating at me. I'd lie awake in the condo in Puerto Princesa, staring at my phone, waiting for her to respond to my messages, imagining what she could possibly be doing that would keep her from answering. I thought about driving the 3 hours to Roxas and showing up unannounced, but what would that accomplish? If she was doing something behind my back, catching, her would only confirm what I didn't want to know. And if she wasn't, I'd look like a jealous fool and make things even worse. By May 2024, it happened again, on her next solo trip to Roxas. 5 days she was supposed to be there, and for 3 of those days, I could barely reach her. When she finally came back to Puerto Princesa, she seemed distant. She wouldn't make eye contact. She was on her phone constantly, typing messages and then quickly closing the screen when I walked into the room. At this point, I was definitely sure there was something going on. I didn't have proof, but I had a gut feeling that wouldn't go away, and I was torn between confronting her and potentially blowing up my entire life, or staying quiet and letting myself be played for however long this lasted. I wasn't looking at her the same way anymore. The trust was broken, even without concrete evidence. Every smile felt fake. Every "I love you" felt like it had an asterisk attached. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being used, and the worst part was I'd let it happen willingly. I was quite friendly with one expat named Tom, a 8-year-old retired engineer from California who'd been living in Puerto Princesa for 5 years. We'd have beers at a place called Ka Louie, and one evening I told him everything. The money I'd spent, the house in her name, the car, the family requests, the suspicion that Carmela was seeing someone else when she went to Roxas. Tom just shook his head and said, "Mate, you're being played. Same thing happened to my friend Dave. House, car, family bleeding him dry. And then he finds out she's got a Filipino boyfriend the whole time. You need to protect what you've got left and get out before it's too late." I didn't want to hear it though, because hearing it meant admitting I'd been a fool, and I wasn't ready for that yet. By the time June 2024 rolled around, my savings were down to about $78,000. I'd been in the Philippines for 2.5 years and burned through $107,000. I knew I couldn't keep living like this anymore, but I also didn't know how to stop it without losing everything. I tried to sit down with Carmela again, properly this time, and set boundaries. I told her I needed to cut back significantly, that the family requests had to stop, that we needed to live on a strict budget. She listened, but she didn't really hear me. She said she'd try, but nothing changed. 2 weeks later, her brother needed money for something again, and she came to me with tears in her eyes asking me to help. It only made things worse when I said no. She didn't speak to me for 3 days. She didn't see a problem with asking because in her mind, this was what husbands did. They took care of their wife's family. And my refusal to keep funding an endless stream of requests meant I didn't love her. I couldn't believe I'd let this happen. Every day I felt more trapped. The house I'd paid for didn't feel like mine because it legally wasn't. The car I'd bought was in her name. If I left, I'd have nothing to show for the 2 years and $107,000 I'd invested, except some photos and a pile of regret. In early July 2024, Carmela told me she needed to go back to Roxas again. Her mother was sick, or so she said, and she needed to be there for at least a week to help out. I told her I'd come with her, but she insisted I didn't need to, that I'd be bored and uncomfortable, that her mother's house didn't even have proper air conditioning and I'd just complain the whole time. Something about the way she said it made my stomach turn. She wanted me to stay in Puerto Princesa. She didn't want me there. And that's when I decided I needed to know the truth, whatever it was. She left on a Wednesday morning. I told her I had a visa appointment on Friday and I'd be busy sorting out paperwork so she shouldn't worry if I didn't message much. She seemed relieved, kissed me goodbye, and left in the Fortuner. I gave her 24 hours, enough time to settle in, and let her guard down. Then on Thursday afternoon, I packed a small bag, got on a bus heading west, and made the 3-hour journey to Roxas unannounced. I didn't call ahead. I didn't tell her I was coming. I just needed to see for myself. I arrived around 6 p.m. The sun was setting, and the small town was winding down for the evening. I walked from the main road toward her mother's house, which was about a 10-minute walk through dirt paths and past small sari stores where kids were buying candy and people were sitting outside their homes chatting. When I got close to the house, I stopped. The Fortuner was parked outside, which meant Carmela was there. But there was another motorbike parked next to it, a nice one, newer model, not the type of bike a family member would typically have in this area. I stood there for a moment, my heart pounding, trying to decide what to do. Then I heard laughing. Carmela's laugh, the one she used to do when we first met, high-pitched and genuine, and a man's voice, speaking Tagalog, saying something I couldn't fully understand, but the tone was unmistakable, playful, intimate. I walked closer to the house. The front area was open, and through the windows I could see inside. Carmela was sitting on a plastic chair, and next to her was a Filipino guy, probably in his early 30s, fit, wearing a tank top and jeans. They were sitting close, too close, and as I watched, he put his hand on her leg and she didn't move it away. She just smiled at him. I stood there frozen, not knowing whether to walk in or turn around and leave. Then her daughter ran past them, playing with a toy, and the guy picked her up and spun her around like he'd done it 100 times before, like he belonged there, like this was his family. That's when I pushed the gate open and walked into the yard. The metal hinges creaked, and both of them looked up. The look on Carmela's face when she saw me was that of sheer terror. She stood up so fast the plastic chair tipped over backward. The guy just stared at me, not scared, just confused about who I was and what I was doing there. "Gerald," she said, her voice shaking, "what are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same thing," I said. My voice was surprisingly calm considering I felt like I was going to be sick. The guy said something to her in Tagalog. She responded quickly, telling him to leave, and he grabbed his keys and walked past me without making eye contact. His motorbike started up, and he was gone within seconds. "Let me explain," Carmela said, but she didn't move toward me. She just stood there wringing her hands. "Explain what?" I asked. Explain who that was? Explain why you're here with him while I'm sitting in Puerto Princesa thinking you're taking care of your sick mother? She started crying, and part of me wanted to comfort her out of habit, but I couldn't move. I just stood there waiting for her to say something that would make this make sense, even though I knew nothing she said could. His name is Carlo, she finally said. We grew up together. We were together before I met you. And you're still together now, I said. It wasn't a question. She didn't answer, which was answer enough. How long? I asked. How long have you been seeing him while you've been married to me? She looked at the ground. Since last year. I didn't plan for it to happen. But when I come here, and you're not here, and he's here, it's just easier. Easier. That's what she said. It was easier to be with a guy her own age who spoke her language and understood her life than it was to be with me. And I couldn't even be angry about that because part of me understood. But that didn't make it hurt any less. Does he know about me? I asked. She nodded. He knows we're married. He knows about the house, the money, everything. And he's fine with it? She shrugged. He understands that I need to be married to you for financial reasons, but he's the one I actually want to be with. There it was. The truth I'd been avoiding for months. I was the bank. Carlo was the boyfriend, and she'd been juggling both of us, taking my money to build a life that I wasn't even really part of. Did you ever love me? I asked, even though I knew I shouldn't. She hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. I care about you, she said. You're a good man. You've helped my family so much. But it's not the same. I walked away before she could say anything else. I walked back through the dirt paths, past the sari-sari stores, back to the main road where I waited for a bus, back to Puerto Princesa. She didn't follow me. She didn't call. She just let me go. When I got back to Puerto Princesa around midnight, I sat in the condo and did the math. I needed to see exactly how much of my life I'd given away for nothing. Starting amount. I had started with $185,000 when I moved to the Philippines in February 2022. Itemized losses. Land in Roxas, $12,000. House, construction, $40,000. Toyota Fortuner, $15,500. Monthly family support for daughter, $250 times 28 months equals $7,000. Various family emergencies and requests, $8,500 monthly living expenses above pension. Average $1,500 times 28 months equals $42,000. Wedding costs, visa fees, and miscellaneous, $3,500. Total spent, $128,500. What remained? Savings left, $56,500. Property owned, none. Everything was in Carmela's name. Income, $4,000. Month pension, £3,200. What was recoverable? Legally, I owned nothing. The house was in her name. The land was in her name. The car was in her name. Under Philippine law, even though I'd paid for everything, I had no claim to any of it because foreigners can't own land, and I'd been foolish enough to put everything in her name without any legal protections. When I sat there looking at those numbers, I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I'd spent 2.5 years of my life, $128,500, and countless hours of emotional energy building a life with someone who had been using me the entire time. The fact that Carlo got to live in a house I paid $40,000 to build, drive around in a car I paid $15,500 for, and be with the woman I'd married, all while I was left with nothing but my depleted savings and my pension, was almost too much to process. I'd lost nearly 70% of my retirement savings over what I'd initially agreed to spend. What a nightmare it was. And the worst part was knowing that Carmela would be fine. She had the house, the car, the land, and her actual boyfriend. She'd played the game perfectly, and I'd been too desperate and too lonely to see it. The fact that she'd been cheating on me since 2023, almost a year into our marriage, instead of just being honest and saying she needed financial support but didn't want a real relationship, I'd have probably gone along with it. We could have arranged something transactional and clear, but she went behind my back and basically stole my money while pretending to love me for over 2 years. Everything I'd paid for was in her name. House and land in Roxas, worth approximately $50,000. Toyota Fortuner, worth approximately $14,000. Depreciated. Cash she'd received over time that I'd never see again. $15,500. Total value she kept. $79,500. I had no legal claim over any of it, other than the fact it belonged to my wife. But did I really want her to be my wife now, after what I'd seen and learned? The answer was obvious, but getting a divorce in the Philippines was nearly impossible, and getting an annulment would cost thousands more that I didn't have and take years I didn't want to spend fighting. I stayed in the condo in Puerto Princesa for 3 days, barely sleeping, barely eating, just staring at the walls and replaying everything in my head, every moment where I should have seen through her, every red flag I'd ignored. Every time someone had tried to warn me and I'd brushed them off. Carmela came back to the city on the Saturday. She walked into the condo like nothing had happened, and, when she saw me sitting there, she tried to act like we could just move past it. "Gerald, we need to talk," she said, setting her bag down. "There's nothing to talk about," I told her. I saw what I needed to see. She tried to get close to me, tried to hug me, tried to explain that Carlo didn't mean anything, that she loved me and we could work through this. She was crying, saying she'd made a mistake, that she'd cut off contact with him, that she'd never see him again. But I could tell she didn't mean any of it. She was panicking because she could see I was serious about ending things, and she was afraid of losing her financial lifeline. When the tears didn't work, she got angry. She said I was being unreasonable, that Filipino culture was different, that I didn't understand how things worked here. She said she'd given me 2 years of her life and I was throwing it all away over one mistake. She even had the audacity to say that if I really loved her, I'd forgive her and we'd move on. I just told her it was already over. You can keep the house, you can keep the car, you can keep whatever else is in your name, but it's over between us. She demanded to know what she was supposed to do, how she was supposed to survive without my support. I told her that wasn't my problem anymore, that she could go back to Carlo since he was the one she actually wanted to be with anyway. The next week was hell. She refused to leave the condo because legally she had as much right to be there as I did since we were still married. We lived in the same space but didn't speak. She'd cry and plead one day, then ignore me completely the next. She'd message me long paragraphs about how much she'd sacrificed for me, how ungrateful I was, how I was abandoning her and her daughter. My plan was to wait until her visa to travel to Puerto Princesa expired and then make my way back to England. I didn't want a big confrontation. I just wanted to disappear and start over, if that was even possible at my age. About 3 weeks after I caught her with Carlo, Carmela came to me one last time. She said she needed money, one final payment of $3,000 to help her transition now that we were separating. I almost laughed. Even at the end, she was still trying to get money out of me. "Carmela, I've given you enough," I said. "More than enough. You have a house I paid for, a car I paid for, and 2 years of your life where you didn't have to work because I supported you. You'll be fine." She called me selfish, said I was a terrible husband, and stormed out. I didn't see her again after that. She went back to Roxas, and I stayed in Puerto Princesa until I could arrange my flight home. When I finally boarded the plane at Puerto Princesa International Airport in September 2024, I felt like I was leaving behind a part of myself I'd never get back. Not Carmela, but the version of me that had been hopeful and optimistic enough to think I deserved a second chance at happiness. The flight back to Manchester felt like punishment. Not for the money I'd lost, but for all the time I'd wasted convincing myself everything was real. 18 hours in the air, watching the same movies I'd watched on the way over 2.5 years earlier, except this time I was heartbroken, and heading back to a country where I had no home waiting for me. Back in Manchester, I had no choice but to start over from the bottom. My old rental flat had been let to someone else years ago. I didn't have enough money to put down a deposit on a new place. I ended up staying with my daughter and her husband in their spare room, which was humiliating at 64 years old. She didn't say, "I told you so," but I could see it in her eyes every time she looked at me. I'm 64 now, living in my daughter's house, working part-time at a warehouse to supplement my pension because $4,000 a month isn't enough when you're starting from scratch in England. Rent would take most of that if I got my own place, so I'm stuck here, contributing what I can and trying to save enough to eventually move out and regain some dignity. My pension covers basics, but with only $56,500 left in savings after losing $128,500 in the Philippines, I can't afford the retirement I'd planned. I should be traveling, enjoying my golden years, relaxing. Instead, I'm stacking boxes 3 days a week and trying to stretch my money far enough to maybe, one day, afford a small flat of my own again. The anger has never left me, and the bitterness stayed in everything I did, and all I could think was that I traded away the last chance I had for something that was never real in the first place. I'd given Carmela the best years of my retirement, and she'd given me nothing but lies and debt. I always think back to what I did and the time I had there with her. And if only she had been honest from the start about what she wanted, if only I'd seen the signs earlier, if only I'd listened to Tom and other expats who'd warned me, things would have turned out like they should have done. And I hate her for it. I hate myself more, but I hate the fact that she could lie to my face for over 2 years, take my money, sleep with another man, and feel no guilt about any of it, like I was just a resource to be exploited until I ran dry. If I could do it over, I would do so many things differently. Never put property in someone else's name. I don't care what the law says. If you can't own it legally, don't buy it. Rent instead. Lease long term. But never hand over hundreds of thousands to someone else and hope they'll be honest. Set firm financial boundaries from the start. The first time Carmela asked for money beyond what we'd agreed, I should have said no and stuck to it. Every time you give in, you're teaching them that boundaries don't matter. Listen when family and friends warn you. My daughter tried to tell me. Tom tried to tell me. But I was so desperate to believe I'd found something real that I ignored. Everyone. They could see what I couldn't. Don't ignore red flags. The unanswered phone calls. The secrecy. The constant money requests. The behavioral changes after marriage. Every single red flag was there, and I explained them all away because I didn't want to face the truth. Keep emergency money separate. I should have kept at least $50,000 in a separate account that Carmela didn't know about, money that was untouchable no matter what. That way, when everything collapsed, I'd have had something to fall back on. I do feel fortunate to still have my pension, because without it I'd be completely destitute, and I still have some savings left, which is more than some guys I've heard about who lost absolutely everything. But it's not the retirement I'd planned for 40 years to have. I'm back in England now, and I have no plans to return to the Philippines. I did briefly consider trying again, maybe with a different woman, maybe in a different city, but I can't bring myself to trust anyone like that again. This time, if I ever do date again, she'll know nothing about my finances, and we'll keep everything completely separate. I learned my lesson the hard way. I'm currently still living in Manchester, sharing my daughter's spare room and working part-time to make ends meet. It's not glamorous. It's not what I thought my mid-60 seconds would look like. But it's reality, and I'm dealing with it the best I can. Current financial snapshot. Savings, $56,500 down from $185,000. Monthly income, $4,000. Pension plus $800 from part-time work equals $4,800 divided by month. Property owned, none. Debt, none. Thankfully, I could have had $185,000 earning interest, which would have given me an extra $600 to $700 a month in passive income on top of my pension. But I don't think you can look back at things and wonder too hard what would have been if I did things differently. It'll drive you mad. My daily routine now is simple. I wake up, have breakfast with my daughter and son-in-law if they're around, go to work 3 days a week doing warehouse inventory, come home, watch TV, go to bed. On weekends, I sometimes meet Tom for a pint. He moved back to the States, but we still video call. We share war stories about the Philippines and remind each other that at least we got out before losing everything. I struggle every day with the humiliation of being back where I started, except older and poorer. I've made peace with the fact that retirement as I imagined it is gone. This is my life now, and I have to accept it. I do know now that Carmela, who is still my wife on paper because Philippine annulments are expensive and complicated, is still living in the house in Roxas with Carlo. I heard from another expat that the house fell into disrepair within 6 months because they couldn't afford proper maintenance, and the car broke down and they can't afford to fix it. She apparently tried to sell the land but couldn't find a buyer at the price she wanted. She would have been in a lot better position if she'd just been honest with me from the start about what she wanted. But she didn't, and therefore, she's not. Part of me takes some small satisfaction in knowing that her deception didn't lead to the easy life she thought it would. The Philippines itself is a beautiful country, and I'm sure, in fact, I'm guaranteed that there are real and genuine people there, and there are genuine relationships between foreigners and Filipinos. I met expats who had been happily married to Filipino women for decades, who'd built real lives together, who genuinely loved each other. But there are also people like Carmela who see Western men as walking ATMs and say whatever they need to say to extract as much money as possible before moving on. I'm not saying everybody's like that. In fact, I know most people aren't. But there are enough of them out there that you need to be extremely careful, especially if you're older, lonely, and have money saved up. I'm telling this story because I want other people out there, other guys out there, to know what can happen. How easy it could be to lose so much money when you think with, let's just call it your heart instead of your head. I didn't think I was naive. I was a grown man in my 60 seconds. I'd been married before. I'd raised kids. I'd worked for 40 years. I thought I knew better. But I got played right from the start just as easily as anyone 20 years younger would have been. Warning signs you should never ignore. When she can't be reached for hours or days when you're not around. When family requests start small but escalate quickly and never stop. When her behavior changes dramatically after marriage or after major financial commitments. When everything you buy has to be in her name and she gets defensive when you question it. When you're not allowed to be part of certain aspects of her life, family gatherings where you're excluded, trips where she insists you don't come. If you see any of these warning signs, walk away, or at minimum, protect your assets. Don't put anything in her name. Don't give her access to your accounts. Don't buy property you can't legally own. And don't let guilt or cultural differences be used as weapons against you. Don't assume that because you're married, she won't betray you. Don't assume that because she says she loves you, it's true. And most importantly, don't put your entire retirement savings at risk for someone you've only known for a few months or even a few years. Keep something back. Protect yourself, because if things go wrong, and there's a good chance they will, you'll need that safety net. 2.5 years ago, I thought I was building a retirement paradise in Palawan. I thought I'd found a woman who genuinely loved me despite the age gap, despite my average looks, despite everything. I thought I was smarter than the other expats who'd been scammed and used. 2.5 years later, I'm back in Manchester, living in my daughter's spare room, working part-time at 64 years old, and wondering how I let myself become such a cliché. I've seen so many people since 2022 come to the Philippines with all the best intentions in the world, fall in love or what they think is love, spend all their money trying to make someone else's life better, and they're the ones who have to deal with the consequences when it all falls apart. The women move on, the families get their houses and their money, and the foreign men are left broke and broken. The fact that I still have my pension and didn't lose absolutely everything like some guys I've heard about, that's gotta be good enough for me. I know expats who are now homeless, who can't afford to leave the Philippines because they spent their last dollar on a woman who disappeared the second the money ran out. Compared to them, I'm fortunate. I have no plans to date again, Filipino or otherwise. I'm too old, too tired, and too cynical to believe in romance anymore. If someone comes along, fine, but I won't be looking, and I certainly won't be offering financial support or buying property or doing any of the things that got me into this mess. The Philippines was the country that I always dreamed about retiring to. It was a country I wanted to spend my final years in, enjoying the beaches and the weather and the lower cost of living. I thought I'd found someone to share that dream with. I quickly realized that for every genuine relationship, there are 10 transactional ones disguised as love. I thought I was building a retirement dream in Palawan. But what actually happened was I funded someone else's life while mine fell apart. The house I paid for is falling apart with another man living in it. The car I bought has broken down. The woman I married never loved me. And the money I saved for 40 years is gone. Just make better decisions if you want to do the same. Be careful, guys. Protect yourselves, because the Philippines can be paradise or it can be a financial nightmare, and the difference between the two is often just how desperately you want to believe that someone loves you.